The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the clerk turning pages 3 rows behind me. I stood at the defense table in my Army service uniform, hands loosely clasped in front of me, ribbons straight collar perfect. I've worn this uniform in places a lot louder than a probate courtroom in Montgomery County, Ohio. Kuwait in August. A motor pool at 0500. A brigade legal briefing where nobody wants to hear what the regulation actually says. This was different. This time the noise was coming from the other table. My parents sat with their attorney folders stacked neatly, posture confident. My mother wore navy blue. My father had on a gray suit that didn't quite fit at the shoulders. They looked prepared, calm, almost comfortable. When I first walked in, my mother glanced up at me and smiled. Not a warm smile, not a nervous one. A smirk, the kind you give when you think you already won. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered. Everyone stood. I stayed still, focused on the bench, not on them. I've learned that in court attention is currency. You don't spend it where it doesn't earn you anything. The case caption was read into the record, Harper versus Whitaker Trust. My last name. His last name. That was the whole story in one line. My parents had filed a petition to contest the trust my adoptive father created before he died. They were asking the court to invalidate it and redistribute the estate. The estate was worth approximately $3.8 million. They wanted all of it, not part of it. Not a settlement, all of it. Their legal theory was simple on paper. Biological next of kin. Undue influence. Emotional manipulation. They argued that Thomas Whitaker, a retired Air Force logistics officer and certified public accountant, had been pressured into leaving everything to me. The irony there was almost impressive. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked toward their attorney first. Counsel, can you explain the statutory basis for your client's standing? That word matters. Standing. In probate court, if you don't have it, you don't get through the door. Their attorney began outlining their argument. Biological relationship. Equity, fairness, emotional circumstances. He spoke with the confidence of someone who thought sympathy might carry more weight than statute. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. I didn't look back at my parents. But I could feel it. That same energy from 1999. The assumption that I was small. That I would sit quietly while they decided what happened to me. The attorney finished. The judge took a few notes. Then she looked at my table. My civilian counsel sat beside me, hands folded ready. I had hired him intentionally. As a JAG officer, I could not represent myself in a personal civil matter without raising conflict concerns, and I had no intention of dragging the Army into my family history. I report things early. I keep lines clean. He stood and began walking through the adoption record. Termination of parental rights finalized when I was 10. Final decree of adoption entered when I was 12. Revocable living trust executed properly. Corporate trustee appointed. Clear beneficiary designation. Ohio law is not vague about these things. When parental rights are terminated, inheritance rights tied to that biological relationship terminate with them. When an adoption is finalized, the adoptive parent becomes the legal parent in every relevant way. Emotion does not override statute. The judge flipped through the trust document. She paused at the adoption decree attached as an exhibit. Then she asked a question that shifted the air in the room. Are you contesting the validity of the adoption? There was a pause at the other table. A small one, but long enough. No, Your Honor. Their attorney answered. Then help me understand how your clients believe they have standing. Another pause. My mother shifted in her seat. My father leaned forward slightly like proximity might influence the bench. I kept my posture neutral. The judge turned one more page. This trust appears properly executed. The beneficiary designation is clear. I see no ambiguity. The word clear landed exactly where it needed to. My mother looked at me again. The smirk was still there, but thinner now. It had been 22 years since the last time I had been in the same room with both of them. The last time I saw them together, I was 8 years old, sitting on a wooden bench at a Greyhound station in Dayton, Ohio, holding a granola bar and watching the front doors. They had told me they'd be back in 15 minutes. In court, my father adjusted his tie. My mother leaned toward their attorney and whispered something. I wondered if they remembered the bench. The judge closed the file for a moment and looked directly at their table. Counsel absent a challenge to the adoption or a defect in the trust. I am struggling to see how your clients have standing to contest this estate. Struggling. Judges do not use that word casually. My parents' attorney began pivoting toward equity arguments. Fairness, moral obligation, family reconciliation, the idea that blood should matter more than paperwork. I almost laughed at that one. Blood mattered when it was convenient. Paperwork mattered when it paid out. I kept that thought to myself. Across the aisle, my mother's expression hardened. The confidence was still there, but it was working harder now. I had self-reported this lawsuit to my chain of command the week I was served. Standard practice. Large civil litigation tied to inheritance can trigger financial scrutiny. I had walked into my security manager's office with the petition in hand. He read the first page, looked up, and asked once, one question. Any financial instability on your end? No. Any undisclosed debt? No. Then we're fine. Keep us informed. Transparency keeps you steady. Panic makes mistakes. That lesson didn't start in the Army. It started at a bus station. The judge turned back to my counsel. Anything further? He declined. The law was already doing the work. The courtroom fell into a brief silence. Papers shifted. Someone coughed in the gallery. My mother's eyes were on me again. This time the smile didn't quite reach her face. There's a particular kind of look people give when they realize a plan might not be unfolding the way they imagined. It isn't fear. Not yet. It's recalculation. The judge leaned back slightly. I will take the matter under advisement and issue a ruling shortly. Not dramatic, not loud, but final enough to change the temperature in the room. The gavel didn't slam. Probate court rarely works that way. The judge simply rose. The bailiff called out. Everyone stood. My parents gathered their folders. Their attorney spoke quietly to them, voice lower now. I stayed where I was for a moment longer looking at the empty bench. They had come back for $3.8 million. They had come back convinced I was still the 8-year-old they left behind. And standing there in uniform in a courtroom 20 minutes from the bus station where they walked away, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. They never came back because they missed me. They came back because they needed something. Outside the courtroom, the hallway filled with the low hum of other cases waiting to be called. My parents passed me without stopping. No apology. No attempt at conversation. Just proximity. My mother's shoulder brushed mine as she walked by. She didn't look at me this time. I watched them reach the elevators at the end of the corridor. For a second, I saw the outline of a different hallway. Different doors. Different year. Greyhound station. East side of Dayton. February air cutting through my coat zipper. 4 hours on a bench. I remembered how long 15 minutes can feel when you're 8. In probate court, time moves differently, but it always moves. And eventually, everything written down has to be read aloud. I watched the elevator doors close on my parents, and instead of following them, I walked the other direction toward the stairwell. I've always preferred stairs. Elevators feel like waiting. Stairs feel like moving. By the time I pushed through the heavy courthouse doors and stepped into the Ohio afternoon, the air was cool and dry. Montgomery County in early spring doesn't try to impress anyone. It just exists. Honest, gray, functional. Dayton is only 20 minutes from the Greyhound station where they left me. 20 minutes is nothing when you're driving. It's everything when you're 8. In 1999, the bus station on East 5th Street wasn't charming. It wasn't nostalgic. It was fluorescent lights, plastic chairs bolted to the floor, vending machines that ate dollar bills, and a schedule board that buzzed louder than it should have. My father parked across the street. I remember that clearly. He didn't pull into the lot. My mother handed me a granola bar and told me not to talk to strangers. She said they were going to buy tickets and would be back in 10 minutes, maybe 15. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I ate the granola bar too fast because I was nervous. I remember trying to save half of it and failing. After an hour, I stopped counting. People came and went. A woman with 2 toddlers argued about luggage fees. A man with a guitar case slept across 3 seats. The television mounted near the ceiling played the news with no sound. Every time the front doors opened, I looked up. At some point, hope stops feeling like hope and starts feeling like confusion. A station employee eventually approached me. Her name was Deborah. I remember because she wrote it down for me while she asked questions. Who did you come with? What are their names? Do you have a phone number? I gave her everything I knew. She nodded carefully. not the way adults nod when they understand. The way they nod when they're already deciding something. Police arrived first, then a caseworker from Montgomery County Children's Services. I kept expecting my parents to walk through the doors and explain it all. I assumed there had been a mistake, a missed announcement, a wrong line. I didn't understand abandonment. 8-year-olds don't think in legal categories. That night, my parents filed a missing person report. They told police I had behavioral issues, that I had a history of running off, that they had searched the station but couldn't find me. There was no history. I was in 3rd grade. My biggest discipline problem was talking during silent reading, but once something is written down, it takes on weight. Their statement went into a file. The file went into a system. The system moved forward. Within months, I was placed in foster care. Within a year, the missing person report remained open. 3 years later, something else happened. My parents filed a claim on a child rider life insurance policy attached to my father's primary policy. The rider included a clause covering extended unexplained disappearance under specific conditions. It required documentation that I remained missing. It required an affidavit. It required patience. It did not require anyone to ask whether the disappearance was convenient. The payout was approximately $62,000. For some families, that's life-changing money. For others, it's just enough to solve a short-term problem. I didn't learn about the policy until decades later when I requested certified copies of my adoption file for unrelated estate documentation. Buried in the record was a reference to prior insurance proceedings. That phrase bothered me. Insurance proceedings for an 8-year-old. I requested additional documents through a public records request. It took weeks. Government offices move at their own speed. When the packet arrived, I sat at my kitchen table in North Carolina, still in uniform from work, and opened it carefully. There it was. Policy number. Rider clause. Affidavit signed by both of them. Statement referencing my disappearance. Payment confirmation. No criminal investigation followed at the time. There was no competing narrative. No adult came forward to say I had been left behind on purpose. The system processed what it was given. Paperwork decides outcomes. That lesson didn't begin in the Army. It began in Dayton. Back in 1999, I moved through 2 foster placements before landing in a quieter home outside Centerville. I stopped asking when my parents were coming back after the first few months. It wasn't dramatic. There wasn't a specific day when I gave up. Hope just thinned out gradually. The termination of parental rights hearing happened when I was 10. I remember sitting in a different courtroom, legs barely touching the floor from the chair. A guardian ad litem explained that my biological parents had not complied with reunification requirements. Failure to engage in services. Failure to maintain contact. Failure to provide support. Failure is a legal word. It sounds cleaner than what it means. The court terminated their rights. At 10, I didn't fully grasp what that meant. At 34, standing in probate court, I understood it perfectly. Termination means severed. Severed means no claim. No claim means no standing. And yet they had filed anyway. Years after collecting insurance money tied to my disappearance, years after losing their parental rights, years after never attempting to contact me again, they had returned when the number attached to my name was $3.8 million. I sometimes wonder whether they remembered the exact date they left me at the station, whether they remembered what I was wearing, whether they remembered the granola bar, or whether they only remembered the payout amount. The bus station still exists. It's been renovated. New signage, better lighting. I drove past it once during a temporary duty assignment in Ohio. I didn't stop, not because it scared me, because it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what came after, and what came after was a man who didn't leave. He showed up the following Thursday with a folder under his arm and a travel chest set in his jacket pocket. Thomas Whitaker was not dramatic. He didn't arrive like a movie moment. No swelling music. No speeches about destiny. He was a CASA volunteer assigned to review cases and check in on placements. 55 years old. Retired Air Force logistics officer. Posture straight without trying too hard. Hair already gray, but cut close. Shoes polished out of habit, not vanity. He asked if I knew how to play chess. I didn't. He said that was fine. Most people don't until someone takes the time to explain it properly. That was the first thing he ever gave me time. He visited every week. Same day, same hour. He never missed unless the caseworker rescheduled. He didn't ask intrusive questions. He didn't press for emotional disclosures. He would set up the board on the small plastic table in the visitation room and walk me through the pieces. Pawns move forward, rooks straight, bishops diagonal, knights jump. The first lesson he drilled into me had nothing to do with winning. Don't rush the board, he told me. People lose more games from impatience than from being outmatched. At 8, I didn't know how much that would apply to the rest of my life. He had already been a foster parent once before. A teenage boy who aged out and joined the Marines. Thomas mentioned that casually, like he was listing weather patterns. No hero complex, just facts. After 8 months of weekly visits, he asked the caseworker whether he could apply to become my foster parent. The paperwork was long. Background checks, home studies, financial disclosures, military service verification, psychological screening. He passed everything. When I moved into his house in Centerville, it wasn't a grand moment. He carried my single duffel bag up the stairs. The house was a modest colonial cream siding neat yard, no flashy upgrades. Inside it was orderly without feeling stiff. Bookshelves lined the living room walls. Framed certificates hung in his home office, Air Force Commission retirement citation, CPA license. The room he set up for me had a twin bed, a blue quilt, and a desk by the window. You can change anything you want, he said. It's your room. I kept the quilt. He never tried to replace my parents in conversation. He never criticized them. He didn't speculate about motives. He focused on what was in front of him. Homework first. Dishes after dinner. Saturday morning grocery trips. Church on Sundays not for show, but because he liked structure. Structure became oxygen. When I was 10, the court terminated my biological parents' rights. Thomas attended the hearing. He didn't look at them when they were mentioned in the record. He looked at me. 2 years later, he filed for adoption. Adoption isn't a handshake. It's affidavits, interviews, fingerprints, consent orders. I remember the judge asking me if I understood what it meant. I said yes because I did. It meant permanence. When the decree was entered, my last name changed legally. Whitaker. On paper, it was simple. In practice, it was stability. Thomas never talked about money. Not in the way people usually do. He drove a 12-year-old Subaru. He clipped coupons. He fixed the garbage disposal himself. If something broke, he researched it before calling anyone. But he also sat me down at 14 with a yellow legal pad and explained compound interest. He showed me how to read a balance sheet, how rental income works, why debt can be useful or destructive depending on how it's structured. He explained index funds without condescension. Most people try to be flashy, he said once. Flashy usually costs more than it earns. I didn't realize then how much he had. He didn't live like someone worth millions. He lived like someone who understood time. He kept meticulous records, taxes filed early, receipts organized, trust documents reviewed annually. Every December, he updated beneficiary designations. He never said one day this will be yours. He didn't need to. At 16, I asked him why he volunteered for CASA in the first place. He answered without hesitation, someone should show up. That was his entire philosophy. When I was applying to colleges, he insisted on FAFSA, forms and scholarship applications, even though he could have written checks without blinking. Earn your lane, he told me, even if someone can pave it. I chose Ohio State. ROTC caught my attention because it looked familiar. Structure, uniforms, clear expectations. Thomas didn't push me toward the military. He simply asked if I understood what it meant. Commitment, service, mobility. I did. Commissioning day was humid and crowded. He stood in the audience wearing a suit he'd owned longer than I'd been alive. When I raised my right hand and took the oath, he didn't clap loudly. He nodded once the way he did when a chess move made sense. Second Lieutenant Lillian Whitaker. The name felt earned. After the ceremony, we went to dinner at a quiet place with cloth napkins. He ordered iced tea. I ordered something expensive because I felt like I should. He didn't comment. Uniform looks good on you, he said. He meant more than the fabric. When I deployed to Kuwait for a rotation years later, he sent short emails. No long emotional paragraphs. Just updates about the garden. a reminder to check my LES statements, a note about reviewing beneficiary forms every time I changed duty stations. He trusted systems. He believed in documentation. He believed in staying ready before you needed to be. When he died in 2023, it was at home. No dramatic hospital scene. He had updated his trust documents 6 months prior. He had already met with his corporate trustee. He had already organized every account. Even in death, he didn't leave a mess. The first time I saw the summary valuation, approximately $3.8 million, I didn't feel shock. I felt responsibility. It wasn't lottery money. It was decades of discipline. Vanguard index funds compounding quietly. 3 rental properties paid down over time. A minority stake in a small manufacturing company sold at the right moment. Nothing flashy, everything steady. At the probate hearing, when my parents' attorney used the phrase undue influence, I almost smiled. If they had known Thomas at all, they would have understood how absurd that sounded. He wasn't influenced. He audited. He evaluated. He signed only after reading every page. And he showed up every Thursday without fail because he chose to. Some people leave. Some people invest. Thomas invested. I signed my ROTC contract at a folding table in the student union using the same black pen Thomas always carried in his shirt pocket. The Army didn't feel foreign to me. It felt structured. Clear rank. Clear rules. Clear consequences. After years of systems deciding my life without asking me, I wanted to be part of one that at least wrote its rules down. Ohio State's ROTC battalion met before most of campus woke up. Physical training at OCO 600. Uniform inspections. Leadership labs that ran long when someone forgot a detail. It was the opposite of chaos. Chaos had already had its turn. Commissioning in 2014 was not some dramatic rebellion against my past. It was a logical step. I liked knowing who was in charge. I liked knowing what the standard was. If you met it, you moved forward. If you didn't, you fixed it. My first branch was logistics. It fit. Numbers, planning, movement. You can't run a brigade without someone making sure fuel shows up and paperwork matches reality. The Army runs on forms, signatures, and accountability. That made sense to me. Fort Carson was my first duty station. Colorado air thin and sharp. Motor pools, maintenance schedules. Soldiers who thought supply chains ran on hope instead of spreadsheets. I learned quickly that leadership is not volume, it's consistency. By 2017, I was deployed to Kuwait on a rotation that included support to legal assistance operations. That was the first time I sat across from soldiers dealing with custody battles, child support disputes, divorce filings, family conflicts bleeding into military life. One staff sergeant came in holding a court notice from back home. His ex-wife had filed for emergency custody modification while he was overseas. He was angry, scared, convinced the system was rigged. He asked if being deployed meant he automatically lost. It didn't. There are laws for that. The Service Members Civil Relief Act exists for a reason. It doesn't guarantee victory. It guarantees fairness in process. Paperwork decides outcomes. I explained that to him the same way Thomas once explained compound interest to me. Calm, direct, no sugarcoating. If you respond properly, if you document everything, if you use the system instead of ignoring it, you have a chance. He didn't need sympathy. He needed clarity. That rotation shifted something in me. Logistics mattered, but law determined who stayed in a child's life. Law determined who owned a home. Law determined whether someone got time to show up. Back in the States, I applied for the funded legal education program. It wasn't impulsive. I had transcripts, recommendations, command support. I did the math on service obligations. Thomas reviewed the application before I submitted it. Not to edit my words, but to make sure I understood the commitment. Law isn't about being right, he told me once. It's about proving it in writing. I was accepted. Law school under Army sponsorship is not glamorous. It's a contract. Tuition covered in exchange for years of service. I treated it the same way I treated field exercises. Prepare early. Don't panic before exams. Don't waste time pretending to understand something you don't. Family law caught my attention for obvious reasons. Not because I wanted to relive my past. because I understood how devastating paperwork could be when handled poorly. I interned with legal assistance offices. I saw wills drafted incorrectly, beneficiary forms never updated after divorce, custody agreements written without clarity. Most disasters weren't dramatic, they were lazy. After graduation, I transferred officially into the JAG Corps. The first time I wore the JAG branch insignia, Thomas looked at it for a second longer than usual. "Now you'll be the one reading the fine print," he said. I was assigned to Fort Liberty. The pace was steady. Courts martial administrative actions, legal assistance appointments. I spent mornings reviewing separation packets and afternoons drafting estate documents for soldiers about to deploy. Every will I prepared followed a checklist. Guardian designations. Trust language. Beneficiary alignment with SGLI forms. Contingency planning. You'd be surprised how many people forget to update beneficiaries after a life change. Thomas never forgot. Every December, he reviewed his trust documents with his corporate trustee. He sent me short summaries. Updated rental valuation. Adjusted allocation percentages. Reconfirmed beneficiary designation. He didn't talk about death in emotional terms. He treated it like logistics. When he called in late 2022 and said he wanted to meet in person about some updates, I already knew what that meant. We sat at his kitchen table. Same yellow legal pad. Same neat handwriting. He walked through the structure of the trust again. Revocable living trust. Corporate trustee. Clear beneficiary me. He didn't make a speech. "I want this settled," he said. No confusion, no arguments. He knew about my biological parents in abstract terms. He knew they existed somewhere in Ohio. He knew their rights had been terminated. He never asked for more detail. "Everything's documented," he added. "That's what matters." When he passed the following year, the trustee handled the probate filing exactly as structured. Inventory, valuation, notice requirements, court docket number assigned. Nothing unusual, until the petition arrived. Back in my office at Fort Liberty, the certified mail envelope sat on my desk between a draft separation memo and a soldier's will I had been reviewing. The return address read Montgomery County, Ohio. I opened it carefully. Petition to contest trust. Petitioners Ronald Harper and Denise Harper. I read the first page once. Then again. Undue influence. Biological relationship. Equitable claim. The number 3,800,000 typed clearly in the valuation section. I didn't feel rage. I felt assessment. I walked down the hallway to the security manager's office with the petition in hand. Clearance issues aren't about guilt. They're about transparency. Large civil litigation tied to finances is something you report early, not late. He read the header, flipped through the pages, and looked up. Any debt problems? No. Any financial instability? No. Then document it and keep me updated. Professional. Neutral. Contained. I returned to my office and placed the petition flat on the desk. For 22 years, they hadn't contacted me. No birthday cards. No inquiries. No apologies. Now they had hired counsel. Not to reconcile. To claim. The irony was clinical. They had once written me out of their lives on paper. Now they were trying to write themselves back in. And if there was one thing the Army had trained me to respect, it was this: if something is in writing, you deal with it head on. I laid the petition flat on my desk and read it a third time slower. Probate language is rarely dramatic. It doesn't need to be. It's clean structured and direct. The numbers speak for themselves. The Whitaker Living Trust dated and properly executed. Corporate trustee listed. Beneficiary designation Lillian Whitaker. Estimated value $3,800,000. That number sounds flashy when people say it out loud. On paper, it looked like what it actually was: decades of quiet discipline. The breakdown was straightforward. Roughly $1.9 million in diversified index funds. Vanguard. Broad market exposure. Nothing exotic. 3 rental properties in Ohio, collectively valued at just over $1.2 million each, with long-term tenants and well-documented maintenance histories. The remaining portion from a minority ownership stake in a small manufacturing company Thomas and 2 friends had co-owned for years. It had been sold at a reasonable multiple, no Silicon Valley miracle story attached. No offshore accounts, no mystery LLCs, no hidden vault. Just paperwork done correctly. The trust had been reviewed 6 months before he passed. I knew that because I sat across from him at the kitchen table when he walked through the updates. He didn't dramatize it. "I'm making sure it's clean," he said. Clean meant no ambiguity. Clean meant no room for interpretation. Clean meant if someone tried to challenge it, they'd have to work harder than they expected. When the trustee opened probate in Montgomery County, the process followed standard procedure. Notice requirements were met. Inventory filed. Court docket assigned. Deadlines established. Routine, until my parents filed their petition. I forwarded the entire packet to the civilian estate litigation attorney I retained in Dayton. I chose him deliberately. 25 years in probate court. No interest in theatrics. The kind of lawyer who answers emails with bullet points. He called me that evening. "They're arguing undue influence and biological standing," he said. I read it. "They don't have standing unless they challenge the adoption or prove the trust was invalid. They're not challenging the adoption. Then they're reaching. Reaching is a polite legal word for losing. Still, probate litigation doesn't resolve itself because something is obvious. It resolves because someone files the right motion at the right time. We filed a response asserting lack of standing. Attach the adoption decree. Attach the termination of parental rights order. Attach the trust language. No emotion, no commentary, just law. Meanwhile, the trustee continued managing the assets. Rental income deposited into the trust account. Investment accounts rebalanced as scheduled. Nothing froze automatically just because someone filed a petition. That's another misconception. A lawsuit doesn't magically stop the world. It creates process. I kept going to work. Morning PT. Staff meetings. Legal assistance appointments. A specialist needing help updating his SGLI beneficiary after a divorce. A captain drafting a power of attorney before deployment. I didn't mention the lawsuit to colleagues beyond what was necessary for compliance. There's a difference between transparency and oversharing. One afternoon, I received a request through my attorney. The petitioners were seeking mediation. Translation, they wanted to talk about settlement. The proposed mediation statement included language about family reconciliation and equitable distribution in light of biological ties. I read that line twice. Biological ties. They had once signed an affidavit describing me as a troubled child who ran away. That biological tie didn't seem to carry much weight then. My attorney asked whether I was open to negotiating. "No," he paused. "You understand litigation costs money." "Yes." "You also understand they may be desperate." "Yes." Desperation does not create standing. The discovery phase began. Their counsel requested copies of trust amendments, communication records, and financial summaries. Standard procedure. The trustee complied. Nothing in those documents suggested manipulation. Thomas had met independently with his financial advisor and attorney. Meeting notes reflected clarity of mind. No medical diagnosis impairing capacity. No suspicious last-minute changes. The beneficiary designation naming me wasn't new. It had been consistent for years. That consistency matters. People under undue influence don't usually maintain the same plan across multiple revisions. They change abruptly. They isolate. They contradict themselves. Thomas had done the opposite. Methodical updates, predictable adjustments, clean execution. In one of the filings, their attorney suggested that my military status might have influenced Thomas emotionally, creating a sense of obligation. That one almost made me smile. Thomas didn't operate on obligation. He operated on evaluation. He didn't fund my college out of guilt. He funded it because he believed education produced return on investment. He didn't attend my commissioning ceremony because he felt pressured. He attended because he respected commitment. Trying to frame that as manipulation misunderstood the man entirely. A week later, my attorney forwarded an updated financial disclosure from the petitioners. Foreclosure proceedings had been initiated on their primary residence in Beaver Creek. Reverse mortgage taken out 3 years earlier. Significant medical debt listed. Minimal retirement savings. The picture sharpened. This wasn't a moral crusade. It was a financial one. They weren't contesting the trust because they believed it was wrong. They were contesting it because they were running out of options. Understanding motive doesn't change law, but it explains behavior. I drove home that evening in near silence. North Carolina humidity settling in as summer approached. Traffic steady, predictable. I thought about the $62,000 insurance payout decades earlier. Short-term solution. Temporary relief. Now, decades later, they were facing another financial cliff. And again, they were looking at paperwork attached to my name. At home, I opened the trust summary again, not because I doubted it, but because I respect what I review. Thomas had structured it to minimize estate tax exposure under current thresholds. The rental properties were placed within the trust to avoid ancillary probate complications. The corporate trustee added neutrality. He had built the trust the way he built everything else, quietly and correctly. On my kitchen counter sat the travel chess set he used to carry in his jacket. I set up the board out of habit. Pawns forward, knights angled, rooks steady. The opening move in litigation is rarely dramatic. It's about position, and position more often than not determines outcome. I declined mediation the same way I decline extensions in court, politely and in writing. Their attorney followed up within 48 hours, this time with a different tone. The language shifted from family reconciliation to efficient resolution. That's legal code for "we'd like this to go away before a judge looks too closely." My attorney called again. "They're floating numbers," he said. "How generous?" "Not generous. Strategic. They're probably calculating litigation costs." Of course they were. Probate litigation isn't cheap. Filing fees, motion practice, discovery responses, court appearances. It adds up. That calculation cuts both ways. "I'm not negotiating," I told him. "Not on standing." He didn't argue. He just made a note. The next filing from their side was more aggressive. They expanded the undue influence claim and requested detailed financial disclosures regarding my relationship with Thomas over the years. Gifts, transfers, shared accounts, anything that could suggest dependency or manipulation. It read like they were trying to build a narrative that didn't exist. We responded with documentation, college tuition payments structured directly to the university, no joint accounts, no unusual transfers near the time of death, trust amendments spaced years apart, not rushed in final weeks. Their theory depended on chaos. Thomas had never been chaotic. At work, I handled a separation board packet for a staff sergeant facing administrative discharge. His file was thick. Counseling statements, performance reviews, rebuttal memos. I walked through each page carefully. The Army doesn't remove someone casually. It builds a record. Records matter. That afternoon, I received a call from my attorney that carried a different kind of weight. "They've amended their petition," he said. "On what grounds?" "They're alleging emotional coercion tied to your military status. That your service created a psychological obligation in Mr. Whitaker to reward you." I let that sit for a moment. They're suggesting patriotism is undue influence. In essence, I almost appreciated the creativity. There's something ironic about trying to weaponize honorable service as manipulation. Thomas respected service because he had served. He understood what it cost. He never romanticized it. The amended petition also included a request for deposition. They wanted to question me under oath about my relationship with Thomas. That part didn't bother me. I'm a JAG officer. Being under oath isn't unfamiliar territory. Still, I considered optics. A uniformed Army officer deposed in a family inheritance dispute isn't ideal for anyone's schedule. I notified my chain of command of the deposition request. Again early. Again documented. My colonel's response was simple. Handle it clean. Don't let it distract you from your mission. Mission clarity has a calming effect. The deposition was scheduled in Dayton. Civil Office Building, 3rd floor conference room. Fluorescent lights, water pitcher sweating onto a paper coaster. Their attorney asked questions about my childhood, my time in foster care, my relationship with Thomas, whether he had ever expressed resentment toward my biological parents. No. Did he ever state an intention to exclude them out of spite? No. Did you encourage him to leave you the entirety of his estate? No. Every answer was true. Every answer was short. They tried to suggest that my legal education positioned me to influence him. I reminded them that the trust predated my entry into law school by years. They tried to imply that his generosity toward me demonstrated emotional vulnerability. Generosity is not vulnerability. It's choice. After 3 hours, the deposition ended with no breakthrough for them. Outside the building, the Ohio air felt heavier than North Carolina. Familiar in a way I didn't enjoy. That evening, my attorney forwarded another document. This one wasn't a court filing. It was a financial affidavit from the petitioners required for certain probate motions. The numbers were stark. Foreclosure sale date pending. Credit card balances high. Medical debt substantial. Minimal liquid assets. Desperation looks different on paper than it does in person. On paper, it's columns. In person, it's smirks in a courtroom. Understanding their financial strain didn't change my position. If anything, it clarified it. They weren't arguing law. They were arguing need. Need does not override statute. A few days later, we received notice that the court had set a formal hearing on the motion to dismiss for lack of standing. Date confirmed. Courtroom assigned. The hearing would focus narrowly on whether they had any legal right to challenge the trust at all. That's the kind of hearing lawyers like. Clean. Technical. Less room for emotional theater. I spent the evening reviewing the adoption decree again. It was stamped and signed in 2003. Clear language terminating parental rights under Ohio Revised Code. Severance is final. I read the trust instrument again. Article 3 Beneficiary Designation. Unambiguous. I don't reread documents because I doubt them. I reread them because precision matters. Precision wins. The night before the hearing, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject line, "We should talk." The sender was my mother. The message was brief. We never meant for things to turn out like this. We were struggling back then. We're struggling now. You have more than enough. We deserve something. No apology for the bus station. No acknowledgement of the insurance payout. Just arithmetic. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to my attorney. Documentation. The next morning, I pressed my uniform the same way I do before any formal proceeding. Clean lines. No wrinkles. Not because it was required in probate court. It wasn't. I could have worn civilian attire. But discipline is a habit, and habits don't change depending on who's sitting across from you. When I walked into the courthouse, my parents were already seated. My mother didn't smile this time. My father avoided eye contact. Their attorney shuffled papers more carefully than before. The bailiff called the room to order. And this time, when the judge took her seat, the question wasn't about sympathy. It was about law. When the judge began reviewing the filings at the hearing, I realized something important. Their case was thin on law, but it was loud on narrative. Narrative can sway people. It doesn't usually sway probate judges, but it can muddy water long enough to buy time. And time for someone facing foreclosure can feel like leverage. That's when I decided to go back and look at something I had only glanced at before. The insurance. Not because it would automatically change the probate case. It wouldn't. Standing is about statutory authority, not moral character. But credibility matters. Patterns matter. And if they were going to argue equity, I wanted the full record of their history with paperwork. I hired a licensed private investigator based in Ohio. Former law enforcement. The kind of person who doesn't dramatize findings. He works from records, not rumors. His instructions were simple. Locate documentation tied to any insurance policy connected to my name in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Confirm payout details. Confirm affidavits. Confirm timeline. 11 days later, he called. "I found it," he said. Child rider policy attached to my father's life insurance. Issued before I was left at the bus station. Extended disappearance clause activated after the missing person report remained open for several years. Affidavit signed by both parents. Payment processed. He sent copies of everything. Policy number, application date, rider language, affidavit of continued disappearance. Payout confirmation approximately $62,000. The timeline was clean. Policy issued roughly 18 months before the bus station. Missing report filed the same evening I was left there. Affidavit supporting extended disappearance filed after required period. Payout approved. It wasn't illegal on its face. Insurance companies rely on documentation. If the documentation supports the claim, they process it. The uncomfortable question isn't whether paperwork was filed. It's whether the disappearance was engineered. That's harder to prove, and proving it decades later would require evidence beyond suspicion. Still, patterns matter. I forwarded the entire file to my attorney first. He read through it carefully. "This doesn't directly affect standing," he said. "I know, but it affects optics." "I know. Optics in probate court are secondary to statute, but judges are human. If petitioners present themselves as morally entitled biological parents, while having previously collected insurance tied to their child's disappearance. That context shifts tone. I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in clarity. We discussed whether to introduce the insurance file in the probate proceeding. Ultimately, we decided against formally filing it at that stage. The standing issue stood on its own. Mixing arguments can dilute focus. Instead, I made a different decision. I submitted the documentation to the Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office with a cover letter summarizing the timeline and asking whether the file had ever been reviewed in light of subsequent adoption proceedings. The response was brief. File received. Matter will be reviewed. No promises, no dramatic statements, just acknowledgement. That's how most real legal processes work. Slow, quiet. A few days later, my attorney received a supplemental discovery request from opposing counsel. They wanted copies of any communications I had with law enforcement or prosecutors regarding matters related to the trust. That told me one thing. They knew something had shifted. Information travels. Their attorney likely realized that if insurance documentation surfaced in open court, it would complicate their portrayal of my parents as sympathetic biological heirs. I complied with discovery obligations. Transparency protects you. At work, I continued drafting wills for deploying soldiers. One private asked whether naming a parent as beneficiary automatically guaranteed that parent control over his estate. Only if the paperwork supports it, I told him. That's the theme. It never changes. One afternoon, I received a voicemail from an unfamiliar number with a Dayton area code. I let it go to voicemail. My father's voice. Short. Controlled. We don't need to involve outsiders. This can be handled privately. Outsiders. The court is not an outsider. The court is the venue you chose when you filed a petition. I didn't call back. Instead, I saved the voicemail file and forwarded it to my attorney. Documentation. A week before the scheduled standing hearing, their attorney filed a motion requesting additional time for discovery, citing newly surfaced issues. Newly surfaced issues. Translation: something they hadn't anticipated was now in play. The judge denied the continuance request within 48 hours. The standing hearing would proceed as scheduled. That denial changed the posture of the room before anyone stepped into it. On the morning of the hearing, I reviewed the insurance file one more time, not because I planned to argue it, but because I wanted the timeline fixed in my mind. Policy issued. Child left. Report filed. Affidavit signed. Payment processed. Years passed. Parental rights terminated. Adoption finalized. Trust executed. Petition filed. You can tell a lot about people by how they use paperwork. Some use it to build. Some use it to extract. When I walked into probate court that morning, their attorney wasn't as relaxed as before. Fewer casual movements. More careful posture. My parents sat straighter than they had at the initial appearance. No smirks this time. The judge opened the file and went straight to the motion to dismiss for lack of standing. She didn't ask about feelings. She asked about law. And this time, every page in the record mattered. Pretrial pressure, chain of command, and military integrity. When the judge denied their request for more time, the shift was immediate. You could feel it across the courtroom. Less confidence. More calculation. Standing hearings are not emotional performances. They are surgical. Either you have the legal right to be there or you don't. There's no middle ground. Still outside the courtroom, pressure doesn't stop just because the statute is clear. 2 days after the denied continuance, my office received a call from a civilian number asking to speak to Captain Whitaker regarding a pending personal legal dispute. The call was routed through our front desk. That's when I realized they were trying something different. Not illegal. Not dramatic. Just inconvenient. I walked down to our administrative NCO and asked for the number. It matched their attorney's office. I called back from my government cell speaker off tone neutral. Their attorney wanted to clarify whether my chain of command was aware of the litigation and whether the Army had any concerns about my involvement in an inheritance dispute involving substantial assets. It was subtle. The implication was obvious. Financial scrutiny. Clearance review. Professional embarrassment. I answered calmly. My command has been informed. There are no clearance concerns. Any further communication regarding this matter should go through my civilian counsel. Pause. Then a polite acknowledgement. Pressure attempt logged. I documented the call in a short email to my security manager and my civilian attorney. Not dramatic, not accusatory, just factual. Transparency keeps things boring. Boring is good. That afternoon, I stopped by my colonel's office for a scheduled briefing on an unrelated matter. When the official agenda ended, I mentioned the attempted contact. He didn't look surprised. "If they're losing on law, they'll look for leverage," he said. "Stay professional. Keep it clean." That was the entire guidance. Military culture does not reward panic. It rewards procedure. Back in my office, I reviewed the standing argument again. Ohio law is clear: once parental rights are terminated and adoption finalized, biological parents no longer retain inheritance rights. Standing to contest a trust requires either beneficiary status, statutory heir status, or a valid challenge to the trust's formation. They had none. Still, people file cases without standing all the time, hoping confusion creates opportunity. The night before the hearing, another email arrived from my mother. This one longer. She wrote about medical bills, about fear of losing their home, about how family should help family. She mentioned how proud they were when I joined the Army. That line made me stop. Proud. They had not attended my commissioning. They had not attended law school graduation. They had not attended anything. The word was being used strategically. She closed the email with, "You have more than enough. We only need a portion." Portion is a flexible term when the total is $3.8 million. I didn't respond. I printed the email and added it to my litigation folder. At 500 the next morning, I ran 3 miles on base before heading to court. Routine matters. Sweat clears distraction. The cadence of boots on pavement is consistent. No surprises. By the time I changed into my dress uniform, my mind was steady. Some people mistake calm for coldness. It isn't coldness. It's discipline. In the courthouse hallway, their attorney approached my counsel first. Low voices. Controlled gestures. I stayed a few feet back, reviewing a highlighted copy of the adoption decree. The judge entered. Everyone stood. She opened the file without ceremony. "Counsel, we are here on the respondent's motion to dismiss for lack of standing." Straight to it. Their attorney attempted one more pivot. He argued equitable considerations, moral fairness, the idea that blood should not be erased by paperwork. The judge listened without interruption. Then she asked a question that ended most of the room's uncertainty. "Are your clients alleging that the adoption was invalid?" "No, Your Honor." "Are you alleging that the trust was improperly executed?" "No, Your Honor." "Then explain to me how they have standing." Silence briefly. There are moments in litigation when you realize that argument has run out and gravity has taken over. Their attorney spoke again, referencing emotional bonds. The idea that the decedent may have acted under psychological pressure tied to my service and history. The judge glanced down at the adoption decree again. "Emotional bonds do not override statutory termination of parental rights," she said. "And absent a defect in the trust instrument, biological connection alone is insufficient." She turned toward my counsel. "Anything further?" "No, Your Honor." The air in the courtroom felt thinner. My parents sat rigid. My mother's hands clasped tightly in her lap. My father stared straight ahead. The judge closed the file and looked directly at the petitioners. "The court finds that the petitioners lack standing to contest the Whitaker Living Trust. The motion to dismiss is granted." No dramatic pause, no raised voice, just law applied. She continued. "Attorney fees incurred by the respondent in defending this action will be awarded. Counsel may submit documentation." That line matters. Fee shifting signals the court's view of the case's merit. The gavel tapped once, not loud. Final enough. The bailiff announced the court adjourned. As people stood, I remained still for a moment. Not to savor it, not to process emotion, to observe. Their attorney leaned toward them immediately. Quiet, urgent conversation. Papers shuffled. My mother did not look at me. Not this time. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed again with ordinary cases, traffic citations, small claims, disputes, routine probate matters. Life doesn't pause for personal drama. My attorney shook my hand once. "Clean ruling," he said. "Yes. Submit your fee documentation. Let the trustee handle the rest." Trustee. Process. Structure. In the elevator down, I stood alone, uniform reflecting faintly in the metal paneling. The lawsuit was dismissed. But documentation has a long memory, and everything that gets written eventually finds its place in the record. I stepped out of the elevator into the courthouse lobby and felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief. Stability. The kind that comes when a decision matches the record. Outside, the Dayton air felt ordinary. Traffic moved. A delivery truck double-parked near the entrance. No one on the sidewalk knew a $3.8 million inheritance case had just been dismissed upstairs. That's how most real victories look. Quiet. My attorney and I walked a few steps together before parting ways. He reminded me to send updated billing statements for the fee petition. The trustee would coordinate payment once the order was journalized. Routine. Back at Fort Liberty 2 days later, I was in a legal assistance appointment with a staff sergeant who wanted to update his will before deployment. He had 2 kids, a house with a mortgage, a beneficiary designation he hadn't reviewed in 6 years. We walked through guardianship language, executor selection, trust provisions for minor children. Make sure the paperwork matches your intent, I told him. Intent doesn't count if it isn't written correctly. He nodded and signed where indicated. Later that afternoon, my civilian attorney emailed a copy of the signed judgment entry. The language was precise. Petitioners lack standing as a matter of law. Petition dismissed with prejudice. Attorney fees awarded to respondent. With prejudice means it's over. They don't get to refile the same argument. That phrase carries weight. I forwarded the judgment to the corporate trustee. They responded within the hour, confirming they would begin processing reimbursement for litigation costs and update the probate docket accordingly. No celebration, just execution. 3 days after the dismissal, I received a certified letter from the Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office acknowledging receipt of the insurance documentation I had submitted weeks earlier. The letter was formal. Your materials have been reviewed. At this time, we are assessing whether further inquiry is warranted. No promises, no threats. Just record acknowledgement. Statutes of limitations are real. Fraud cases decades old aren't simple. Prosecutors weigh evidence timing and likelihood of success. Not every wrong becomes a courtroom moment. I understood that. My interest had never been spectacle. It was documentation. That same week, my mother left another voicemail, shorter than the last one. You didn't have to do this. I replayed that sentence once. Didn't have to do what? Defend a trust. Respond to a lawsuit. Show up in court. I didn't return the call. I saved the voicemail file. Then I deleted it from my phone after forwarding it to my litigation folder. No need to carry unnecessary files in daily life. A week later, the foreclosure notice on their Beaver Creek home was updated publicly. Sale postponed pending negotiation with the lender. Desperation has momentum. I thought about the $62,000 insurance payout from years ago. Temporary relief. Temporary postponement. Problems rarely disappear because you inject money once. They resurface if behavior doesn't change. At work, my schedule filled with routine Army matters. Administrative separation boards, non-judicial punishment review, legal training for junior officers. One afternoon, I conducted a briefing on ethics and financial responsibility. We covered disclosure requirements, outside employment, conflict of interest standards. Transparency prevents suspicion. During questions, a lieutenant asked, "What happens if someone files a frivolous lawsuit against you personally?" "You respond through proper channels," I said. "You don't panic. And you don't let it distract you from your duty." The answer felt familiar. On a quiet Saturday morning, I drove past the Centerville house where Thomas had lived. The trustee had already initiated standard estate asset management procedures. Rental properties remained occupied. Lawn maintained. Taxes paid. Nothing flashy. Everything steady. I stood in the driveway for a minute before leaving. Not for nostalgia. For acknowledgement. The trust had worked exactly as designed. Clear beneficiary. Clear execution. No ambiguity. That's what Thomas wanted. Later that week, my attorney called again. "There's no appeal filed," he said. "The deadline has passed." Understood. From a probate standpoint, it's finished. Finished. That word doesn't carry drama. It carries closure in paperwork terms. I updated my litigation log one final time. Case dismissed. Fees awarded. No appeal. File archived. At Fort Liberty, life didn't slow down. Soldiers still needed wills. Families still needed guidance. Deployments still moved on schedule. The Army doesn't reorganize itself around personal history. That's one of the reasons I stayed. The following month, I met with a financial advisor recommended by the trustee. Not to celebrate the inheritance, to structure it responsibly. We discussed conservative growth, tax implications, charitable allocations. I mentioned my interest in supporting foster youth legal advocacy. He nodded and asked for projected numbers. Numbers are cleaner than emotion. A small endowment structured properly can outlast a single lifetime. As I left his office, I thought about the bus station bench again. Not with anger, with clarity. They had once relied on paperwork to declare me missing. They had relied on paperwork again to try to declare themselves entitled. Paperwork had answered both times, and this time it answered in my favor. I drove back to North Carolina the weekend after the appeal deadline passed, the highway stretching flat and predictable in front of me. The case was over on paper, but endings in real life aren't dramatic. They're administrative. The trustee finalized the reimbursement of attorney fees. The trust assets remained intact. Rental income continued to deposit on schedule. Investment allocations adjusted automatically based on market movement. Nothing exploded. Nothing collapsed. That's how stability looks. 2 weeks after the dismissal, I received a short follow-up letter from the prosecutor's office. The language was measured. After review of the materials provided and consideration of applicable statutory limitations, this office will not be pursuing criminal charges at this time. That wasn't surprising. Statutes of limitations matter. Evidence ages. Cases become difficult to prosecute decades later without clear proof of intent beyond documentation. The insurance payout would remain part of a file somewhere. It would not become a headline, and I was fine with that. Justice doesn't always look like handcuffs. Sometimes it looks like dismissal with prejudice and a fee award. Sometimes it looks like a court recognizing you don't belong in a case at all. Back at Fort Liberty, life kept moving. Morning formations, legal reviews, training calendars. One afternoon, I sat across from a young specialist who had aged out of foster care before enlisting. He was trying to navigate child support paperwork while deployed. "I don't have anyone back home," he said, almost casually. That sentence hit differently. I helped him draft a response motion, explained jurisdiction issues, walked him through timelines. Clear steps. No emotional commentary. When he left, I stayed at my desk a little longer than usual. Thomas had shown up in a visitation room with a chess set. He hadn't promised millions. He had promised consistency. That's what changed my life. The meeting with the financial advisor turned into 3 meetings. We structured a charitable endowment using a portion of the trust funds carefully calculated, so the principal remained stable. The name was simple: the Whitaker Foster Advocacy Fund. Not flashy, not self-congratulatory. The purpose was direct provide funding for court-appointed legal representation for children in foster care who otherwise might not receive consistent advocacy in custody and termination proceedings. Paperwork shapes childhoods. Better paperwork requires better representation. The endowment documents were drafted, reviewed, and executed through the same corporate trustee that managed the trust. Compliance requirements were met. Reporting standards set. Oversight board established. Clean. I didn't announce it publicly. There was no press release, no social media post. The work began quietly, the same way Thomas had operated. A few months later, I received notice that the foreclosure on my biological parents' home had proceeded. The property was sold at auction. I learned about it the same way anyone can learn about public records, through documentation. No calls, no emails, no confrontation, just outcome. I didn't feel triumph. I felt distance. The Army reassigned me to a new role within the legal office that fall. More responsibility. Larger caseload. Mentoring younger officers. One evening after a long day, I unlocked my office drawer and pulled out the small magnetic chess set Thomas used to carry. I set up the board without thinking. Opening moves. Control the center. Don't rush the board. People assume revenge stories end with a dramatic speech or a final confrontation. Mine didn't. There was no hallway argument, no emotional reunion, no cinematic apology. There was a trust executed properly. There was a petition dismissed for lack of standing. There were attorney fees awarded. There was a foreclosure proceeding recorded in public documents. And there was an endowment quietly funding representation for children who sit in waiting rooms unsure who will show up. Some people left me at a bus station with a granola bar. One man in uniform stayed. He didn't teach me how to destroy people. He taught me how to build something that lasts longer than a lawsuit. If my parents had hoped the court would make me small again, it didn't. It confirmed what had already been true for years. They gave up their claim when they walked away. Thomas earned his when he stayed, and I kept what he left me the same way he taught me to keep anything valuable, by reading every line. I still think about that bench sometimes, not because it hurts, not because I'm angry, but because it reminds me how small a moment can feel when you're inside it, and how big it looks years later when you understand what it changed. At 8 years old, my parents abandoned me at a bus station and assumed that was the end of my story. Years later, they came back to sue me for the $3.8 million my adoptive father left me, believing money could reopen something they had already signed away. What they didn't understand is that abandonment doesn't define you. Structure does. Discipline does. Documentation does. This isn't just another family revenge story. It's about what happens when family drama collides with real law, real paperwork, and real accountability. It's about the difference between biological ties and chosen loyalty. And it's proof that sometimes the strongest response isn't anger, it's showing up prepared. If this story meant something to you, if you believe some revenge stories are really about justice and growth, subscribe to the channel. There are more real family revenge stories like this, grounded, legal, and very human. And if you've ever been written off, underestimated, or left behind, remember this: the record isn't finished until you decide it is.